hopefully I've stopped it. Um, Basil, do you want like a couple of minutes or are you ready to go?
I'm ready when y'all are.
All right. Okay, great. Then I will introduce you. Um, I had let me turn on my video, even though there we are, that my video is on. I really I found out about Basil from Margaret Roach's A Way to Garden, and was just really impressed by his discussion about trees. In fact, I'll just be honest, it kind of gave me the impetus to have this full conference. I was like, okay, trees. I love trees, and speaker who has a book that you can get for free. This is a copy of From Wasteland to Wonder. You can get it for free off of his website. And you can also, it's $10.75. How do you do this? This is just incredible. And this is not a small book. It is hardcover. It's beautifully illustrated. More than that, even if that isn't enough, it even has, you can't see the too well here on my screen. It even has QR codes that lead to videos that can expand on the material even further. It's an incredible resource we can all have, and very, very quickly if we want, within seconds, if you just go to the website. And it's a fabulous resource. Again, I'm a huge fan of trees. I had a wonderful arborist for many years, who's Stacy Phelps, who's now the arborist for the town of Milburn, I believe. And it's just a wonder what a good arborist can do. And really, you can just I'm in awe of the knowledge that they have. Um, and so, in any case, Basil is from Raleigh, North Carolina, a little bit further south of us, and he is the not only an author of this book, he's an arborist, certified arborist, running a tree care company called Leaf and Limb. Leaf and Limb doesn't do takedowns and instead focuses on tree care through all phases of life, and that was something that tree care throughout the lifespan of a tree was something and the different attention that trees need was something I really took away from the wonderful podcast with Margaret Roach. And I'm not, I don't really want to do a long introduction. The only other thing I will say is that not only was he on the podcast with Margaret, but also the subject of a profile by Margaret called "Why One Man Runs a Tree Service That Won't Cut Down Dead Trees," and that's on the New York Times website as well. So, with that introduction, I want to turn it over to you.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, everybody. Hopefully you can see me on the screen here. I'll just start with a brief introduction and then I'll move to my PowerPoint presentation. I am from Raleigh, North Carolina. I own a tree care company here in Raleigh called Leaf and Limb. I'm also the co-executive director of Project Panda, which is our nonprofit. Essentially, our purpose at Leaf and Limb, we care for trees because we love this planet. That's also my personal joy and purpose in life is all about trees and plants and using them and working with them, quite frankly, to as a vehicle for healing. And that's sort of what we're going to be talking about today. Our nonprofit is called Project Pando. We aim to connect people more closely with trees. We'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation, but for now, just know I really love trees. Today's presentation is ultimately, we're going to hit a little bit of a depressing point early, but I don't want you to think this is going to be a depressing doom and gloom presentation because it's not. This is a presentation about hope. I think there's a lot of really cool things we can do to help heal Earth. And we're going to talk about those things today. And even if you don't necessarily care about the topic of healing Earth, the great thing is that everything we'll discuss today ultimately saves you time and money. And saving a little more time, a little more money, these are things I'm sure we could all benefit from. So hopefully you enjoy today. We're going to start. Let me move to my PowerPoint presentation here. Bear with me one second. All right, I'm going to share my screen and let's make sure this works. So let me know. Let's see, I will look at comments here. Can everybody see my presentation? Just want to make sure there's no issues because inevitably technology gets in the way. There's never a presentation without a technical glitch. So I'll just take a second if you can just confirm everything looks good there. Assuming it does, let's keep going. All right, so this is me and emails here. I'll have it at the end if you want to take a look later. But we're going to start here with the premise. So the premise to begin with is that we have these natural systems that work really well. And I like to just take a brief minute to go over the basics because I think it sets the stage for what the issues are. And then that will set the stage for the ideas I'm going to give you today. So we're going to look at just a couple of major systems. So first we have photosynthesis. It's this really incredible system whereby plants harness the energy from sun and they turn it into life, essentially. If you were to zoom way back, if you looked at planet Earth a long time ago, we would have seen this planet full of rocks. And every time it rained, the water just rushed out into the ocean. The rocks broke down thanks to rain and sand, etc., and they turned into what is sand, silt, and clay. Um, Over time, these little organisms made their way around the planet, sort of began with lichens. And lichens are this really fun combination of fungi and bacteria. And they worked in tandem to break down those rocks, so that sand, silt, and clay. And as they multiplied, they inevitably died. So you had this buildup of dead organic matter. These living things that die, that's organic matter. That's sort of the definition of what that is. So over time, sand, silt, and clay became infused with this organic matter. And that is essentially the difference between dirt and soil. Dirt is just sand, silt, and clay. But then when you add that biological component, whether it's living or dead, now we have soil. And that sort of set the stage for this new iteration of Earth, where now we have this living soil interface. So it's not just rocks. Now water actually stays put. And that's a very important part of soil. Where there's good soil, there's good structure. Because things live in soil. They're hunting and they're eating and they're pooping and they're dying, and there's just this life that's happening. So you have structure. So structure means that it can hold water. We could think of soil as a sponge. When there's plenty of water, the sponge is full of water. When there's not water, there's air. And that's essentially what soil is. The cool thing is now we have the system developing, right? The photosynthesis is happening. It's creating soil. We're sort of moving forward now at this place where we're talking trees. So trees are pulling in sunlight. They're feeding life in the soil through their roots. They're dropping leaves, and there's organic matter that further feeds soil. The soil is getting richer. It can hold more water. Now, where we have abundantly available water, it begins cycling. So essentially, and the book goes into a lot of detail. I'd encourage you to get a copy of the book if you're interested in learning more about these topics. Like at the beginning when he said that we can get it for free, this is true. The free version is the ebook. If you do want to get the hard copy, we only charge the cost of printing and distribution, which is about $10.75. But all this to say, the book goes in a lot more detail. The way that plants irrigate is they suck that water out. When photosynthesis is happening, there's a lot of water going up into the sky, and that essentially creates this process whereby water cycles begin. So we can think of photosynthesis and healthy soil as being the basis for irrigation for terrestrial life. So when we get to this part of life itself, now we have a system whereby plants feed everything. Either you're eating directly from a tree or grass or flowers, or you're eating something that eats directly from a plant. And that's how trees, grasses, flowers form the basis for life, terrestrial life on this planet. So we have the irrigation coming through the soil and the plants. We have the food coming directly or indirectly for the plants. And all of this leads to this huge amount of life. And this brings us to this fifth part I want to talk about, which is carbon. Carbon is a very essential part of all of this. If we were to zoom way back to the Carboniferous period, pre-Carboniferous, there was something like 1,500 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Well, during that time frame, we had this explosion of plant life, an explosion of soil, and then all the other life that came, the insects, everything that came during that time period. Because of that, the plants drew down enough carbon from the atmosphere that we went from 1,500 parts per million down to about 200 parts per million, and it stayed there for a very long time. So we can now think of trees not only as the basis for soil and the basis for irrigation and the basis for feeding life, but we can also think about them as carbon pumps. That's essentially what they are. In the process of turning sun's energy into food, they have to pull down carbon. That's we know the formula for photosynthesis. It's a little bit of carbon dioxide, a little bit of water, a little bit of sunlight equals um, oxygen and sugar. And sugar has carbon in it. So when that sugar goes into the soil to feed life in the soil, carbon's being stored there. When it goes into the leaves and the caterpillars eat the leaves, now carbon's in the caterpillar. The bird eats the caterpillar, now carbon's in the bird. So trees are essentially just pulling carbon out of the sky and they're pumping it into life. It's a backbone for life. That's a small little overview on the basics of the systems. And next, I want to talk about now sort of how we're breaking these systems. This is the low point of this presentation. This is where I get a little bit depressing. But again, I just want to reiterate, this is ultimately a hopeful, empowering presentation, things you can actually do to fix the issues that we're going to talk about next. I'm basically going to go through all these systems again, but we're going to talk about where we are. So half of all forests and grasslands are gone, which means that if you're thinking about this discussion we just had, half of the photosynthetic capability of the planet is gone. So that means there's going to be less soil and there's going to be less water movement and there's going to be less life. That's not good. We've taken half the food off the table. So this is a problem. In that same space, half of all soil is now gone. That's due primarily to the way that we grow food. If there's some really fascinating facts out there about soil, but one thing that I found particularly wild is that in the last 100 years, we have farmed 1 billion acres into complete desertification. That land's been abandoned and it's not even being used for anything at this point. So if we don't have soil, now we're losing that ability for holding water. And indeed, when that happens, it's not that the rain stops coming. It's just that when the rain falls, it rushes down to the creeks. We have erosion and it rushes out to the oceans and we have flooding. Here in North Carolina, the eastern portion of our state near the coast, it floods regularly. And this is because there's been so much development, so much agriculture in North Carolina over the last several hundred years. We really don't have soil anymore. There's nothing to hold the water in place. Well, guess what that means? That means with the water not percolating down, we're not getting that water down into our aquifers, which means our aquifers are running dry. NASA monitors all of the major aquifers around the planet, and there's something like 37 major aquifers that support most of the planet. Of those, 21 are running out too fast to be replenished, and 13 are in critical status. And we're seeing a lot of stories from around the world right now. Right now, Mexico City's in a very serious situation with water. Istanbul, South Africa went through this recently. We see it routinely in California, a lot of developing water crisis around the world. And this to me is really a concern. With this, we've also seen just in the last 40 years, 60% of all life is gone. This is due in large part to the damage that we've done to forests and grasslands, but it's also due to practices like insecticides and just sort of the way we manage land. There's a lot of reasons for this, but whatever the reasons, it's a tragedy. And then the last part of this is the carbon dioxide. So we talk a lot about CO2 in the atmosphere, and just the last 200 years, there's been about a 40% rise. And we talk a lot about burning fossil fuels and how that contributes, and we should. These are problems. But I don't think we talk enough about how the loss of soil contributes to this and the loss of trees and life. All that carbon that was pulled down during the Carboniferous period is essentially being re-released. We're burning the fossil fuels, which were the plants that rotted during the Carboniferous period, and we're turning soil back into dirt through agricultural practices. So there's lots of carbon going up in the sky. Like I said, we've cut down half of all grasslands and forests, so all that carbon is being re-released. Half of all life is dead. So there's just a lot more carbon being released. With trees being gone, soil being gone, these systems, they're just fundamentally, they're falling apart. We're basically rewinding to the Carboniferous period. So I'm not going to leave you on that low point, this being the lowest point right here. We are going to talk about things that we can do. Now, typically when I do this presentation in person, I'll take some questions, but I will tell you, I'm not sure if that's okay or not. So Kazis, maybe you could let me know if you want to do questions or if you'd rather that I just keep going.
So at the moment, I don't actually see any open questions. So I think we could just keep going.
Okay.
I will, if there are any that seem really pressing, I can let you know. As
Sure. And did you want to do you have any questions or is anything come
I
to
do have
mind?
some for the end, but let's see
Okay,
if we cover
perfect.
them.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll keep going. So this is essentially the thesis of what we're talking about. When we work with these natural systems that we've just described, there's just this amazing things that can happen. At a minimum, you're going to save time and money because instead of fighting natural systems, you're working with them. So many of our landscape paradigms, they're built on the idea of fighting natural systems. Um, the second thing that can happen or will happen when you're working with natural systems is typically now we're going to be creating what is called regenerative processes, and we're going to be healing Earth. We're going to be giving rise to more life, whether it's soil or it's birds, you name it, there's more life. That's really exciting. And then for me personally, I have found a high degree of joy that comes from this work. So hopefully you really enjoy this as well. I'm going to give you some really concrete things you can do, and they're all based on the book. So again, you want the details, the how-tos, the videos that come with it. It's all in the book. Leaflimb.com is the website, and you can go get that if you want. I'm going to give you just some stuff we've developed at Leaf and Limb over the last 2 decades. And hopefully these are things that you can use where you live, where you work, or where you play. So, of course, if the issues are that we've destroyed half of the world's forests and grasslands, and we've cut the photosynthetic capability of this plant in half, then it stands to reason one of the first best things we can do is plant lots more native trees. I'm also a fan of native grasses and flowers, but trees do more work. They feed more life, they pull more carbon down. So really, they are the workhorses in terms of how our systems work. And when we plant trees, my recommendation is plant saplings. I know saplings seem small and oh, they're fragile, but the truth of the matter is saplings are a lot more hardy. They can withstand neglect. They don't have to be irrigated. They need less water. Their root systems often end up being a lot healthier over the long run. When you buy a containerized tree or a balled and burlap tree from a nursery, unfortunately, those roots just from the get-go are already handicapped. And you have to follow, if you're going to plant any of those containerized or B&B, you've got to follow specifications very closely. We have a YouTube video and it teaches people how to properly plant trees. It's 27 minutes long. It's a serious undertaking. In contrast, to plant a young 1 or 2 year old sapling, you basically drive a shovel in the ground, wedge it open, and just make sure you get the roots in the ground and not the leaves in the ground. It's pretty basic. It's like you can do 25 to 30 saplings in the time it takes to do one containerized tree. So I love saplings because of the ease of use, getting more in the ground faster. You're not dealing with the handicapped root system. We could also get into a lot of discussion about the carbon footprint of raising a nursery grown tree versus working with a young sapling. Lots of interesting, a lot of nuance there, but the short of it is it's just easier. And here's the really cool thing. With the saplings, you can grow your own saplings. It's very easy to do. And we're going to actually talk about that later in this presentation. And it's the basis for our nonprofit Project Panda, which is part of that discussion. So I want to show you a few photos here. This is a 1 year old sapling that we grow in a very easy method I'll describe later. And we're only using leaf mold. We're not watering the saplings. We're not doing anything. Whether you grow it or buy it, you can buy these we have a couple of native nurseries nearby that sell very similar 1 and 2 year old nursery stock. And what I want to point out here is look at those roots. Just absolutely amazing root development. You have not only ideal root structure, but so many aggregates that are attached to those roots. That's just symbolic of the life that's in there. So this tree going in the ground, it's not going to have to deal with all the handicaps that come from being in a container or getting dug out of the ground, which is what happens with balled and burlapped. So this tree, it starts off better. And then one of the questions I always get about this is, oh, but how long is it going to take to grow up? I need it to be 6 feet or 8 feet kind of quick. Well, the truth of the matter is these saplings outgrow those containerized trees because they don't have to establish. For you, those of you who've been gardening a while, you're probably used to the phrase, first year they sleep, second year they creep, third year they leap. With saplings, there's no sleeping or creeping. They just get straight to leaping, which is fantastic. Here's another example here, 1-year-old oak sapling. All right, I want to give you my next idea for how you can do amazing things for Earth or just simply save time and money. Save existing trees. This is such an easy thing to do. We've been doing this work for a long time, and I can tell you that, and we used to be a traditional tree service. So I didn't always have this passion for trees. When I started my career, it's been a long time ago, I was just a regular old tree service. We cut trees down. My goal was to build a successful business and do it on the back of tree removals, which was the majority of what we did back then. I've learned a lot along the way, obviously, but I only mention this to let you know that I've been on both sides of the industry. And I can tell you that about 9 times out of 10, a tree does not actually need to be removed. There is probably a much cheaper way to either solve the tree's issue or there's no issue at all to begin with. I'll give you an example here. We get calls quite often, oh, this tree's so big, I'm worried about it, it's near my house. If it falls, it's gonna crush my house. Well, this is a counterintuitive situation. It's actually the big trees that are your safest trees because they're the ones that have weathered the hardest storms for the last 50 years, the last 100 years, and they've proven that they can withstand those storms. So those are the ones you actually don't want to remove. Now, there's exceptions. If you were digging around in the root zone and maybe you compromise the tree's root zone, if you're building an addition onto your house or something. So, of course, there's nuance here, but assuming it's just mostly undisturbed for the last 75 years, that tree is probably a really safe tree. Another one we hear a lot is the tree's moving around. We're really scared that it's going to fall. Well, trees need to move. That's how they grow their strength. It's sort of like humans. If you're moving around, you're exercising, you're building muscle. Trees don't really build muscle like we do, but concepts are the same. They move, they build strength. It's called response growth. So a tree removal could be $3,000 or it could be $5,000. This is such an easy place to save that money and leave the tree. And here's the great thing. By doing so, you keep all of the benefits that tree brings intact. And this picture we're looking at right here, this is a 350-year-old oak tree. There is no money in the world that can buy this particular tree unless you buy the land on which it's sitting. But if Jeff Bezos called somebody up and said, hey, I want this oak in my front yard, well, guess what? No can do. The only thing that can get you this tree is 350 years. And with that comes exponential amount of benefits. The photosynthesis we were talking about, the soil formation, the life that develops in this tree, that it is exponentially more than, say, a 10-year-old tree. All right, we're going to be going through about 8 different things. This is number 3, and we're going to talk about a very specific kind of pruning. And again, I'm couching everything today in this thesis of that these practices will save you money, or at least give you better value for money, and they are going to help heal Earth. So structural pruning is different from other kinds of pruning because it helps make trees stronger. Most pruning doesn't do that. Most pruning is based on aesthetics or based on, like I don't want that branch on my house. But structural pruning is different. It makes trees stronger. And you might wonder, why do we need to do that? Well, in their natural environment, which is the forest, trees are competing with one another for sunlight. They grow densely and they have to go tall and straight So they'll typically have one strong trunk and these small, well-spaced branches, and that is ideal tree architecture. It makes them strong in the face of storms and winds. When these trees are growing in the suburban setting, they tend to grow differently. They're not competing for sunlight, so you'll have these large, multiple trunks and they're growing sideways. Unfortunately, that's a weak architecture that could split. And when it splits, it means it could damage your car or your house, but it also means the tree is going to die potentially. So now this oak that could have lived, say, 1,000 years, it only lives 50 years. Well, we just missed out on, 950 years worth of benefits. And by the way, 1,000 years for an oak is not unreasonable. Red maples can live 500 years in their natural environment. Pine trees are living 300 to 500 years in their natural environment. So trees go a long time, and we want to get them to those old stages because, again, exponential benefits. So I want to show you what structural pruning looks like. Before we do, I always have to mention this. And this just really goes without saying for you all, because you all probably know this, but when we make pruning cuts, whether it's for structural purposes or aesthetic purposes, we always want to cut outside of the branch collar. So whatever pruning you're doing, and I would say structural pruning is the only one that matters, but whatever pruning you're doing, make sure you leave the branch collar. That's how trees heal. I'll show you a picture here. On the left is a tree, those 3 white spots. These 3 are pruning cuts that were proper and the tree healed and it's in great shape. Here on the right, you can see an improper cut. A decay column has set in. It's gone back into the trunk. And over time, unfortunately, this tree will probably split in 2. We were talking about that competition in the forest recently. These 2 are both red maples of the exact same, they're same species, but on the left is a red maple from the forest. I found it on a hike. You can see it's got one main trunk with lots of small, well-spaced branches. This tree on the left is very strong in the face of storms. On the right here, we have a red maple grown in a neighborhood where there is no competition. And you can see these large branches growing off the sides. These are the branches that tend to split. And indeed, this tree did end up splitting after I took this photo some years later. And it's typical. We see it all the time. Our role as arborists, and you can begin this process yourself. The book will give you exact information on the step-by-step on how to do this. But you can begin this with a young tree, is we really want to shape our trees. Shape is the wrong word. Coach our trees through pruning cuts to develop like this one on the left. And indeed, we can. By doing that, we could add 100 or 500 years onto that tree's life, which is significant. Also, just sort of going back to money, if you're going to spend money on pruning, might as well spending it on something useful. Okay, so we just talked about structure. I would say that structure is strength. That's important from a tree standpoint. The second component of sort of the basics of trees is health. So let me just back up for a second. We're talking about the suburban setting specifically. And in the suburban setting, 80% of everything to do with a tree would be either related to strength or health, okay? The strength side is the structure, which we just talked about. Anything to do with health is going to have to do with soil, which is what we're going to get into next. I am talking in the context of trees, but these concepts apply, at least the soil concept would also apply to flowers and grasses and shrubs, of course. So when we're talking about soil health, we're really talking about promoting life. We learned earlier that sand, silt, and clay are dirt. And then when you add life to the dirt, now you have soil. And the 2 ways that we add life to dirt is either through the plant itself. It feeds life through its soil, through its roots. They're called root exudates, just sugars. And then the second way that we talked about was when it drops dead leaves or dead branches, these things rot organic matter. So we feed soil by planting plants and by giving it organic matter. We've already talked about planting plants in we talked about planting native saplings. So do that and you're building soil. But if you want to continue building soil, you can do it by adding wood chips. Trees love arborist wood chips. This is something you can get for free from any tree service. I already know somebody's going to ask the question, but don't they suck nitrogen out of the soil? The answer is no, they don't. The research is really strong on this. It only affects the top millimeter of soil, which is nothing. And even that, um, any negativity that comes from losing nitrogen in the top 1 millimeter is far offset by all the life that it helps build in the soil. So this is a really cheap or free way to feed your trees. Second is leaving the leaves. This is sort of how it happens in the forest. But long before humans were caring for trees and trees were just living happily in these communities that we call forests and jungles, um, leaves would fall, sticks would fall. That is the tree giving food to the soil so that the soil can take care of the tree. That is sort of how our natural systems work. They're not direct, they're sort of indirect, and it all happens through the process of life. So, when we put a fertilizer in the ground, it doesn't really work that way. You can't just feed a tree like you can feed a human through their mouth. Trees need to receive their nutrients and their carbon indirectly through their relationships with life. So leaves do that. So do the wood chips. Here's another thing, compost. I'm a big fan of compost. There's so many ways you can make compost. There's the complicated methods, and then there's the really easy methods. I'll tell you my favorite method is I'll do the following. I will take a rake and I will rake a pile of leaves into the corner of my yard. I will leave for 1 year and I will return. And now I have what's called leaf mold, which is sort of half rotted leaves. That's amazing. If I want it more broken down and more granular, then I'll walk away for 1 more year and I'll come back and now it's leaf compost. I mean, it's just so easy. It doesn't have to be a complicated thing. Trees and shrubs love this because we're feeding all that life in the soil. If you asked a tree, what are its 3 favorite foods? It would probably tell you arborist wood chips, leaves, and compost. And guess what? That means we don't have to use any fertilizers. Fertilizers are only harmful. There's nothing, if you buy it from us, if you buy fertilizers from the store or from the garden center, or if you're buying it from a service provider for your lawn or your trees, it's causing harm. It's the bottom line. Unless you happen to have a service provider that is doing what are called compost tea, which is basically putting compost in water. Unless you're getting compost tea applications, you're using a harmful product and it's causing damage to earth as well. When we put fertilizers in the ground, not only is it not helping our trees, but it's actually damaging life in the soil. So we're turning soil back into dirt. It leaches into our water systems. It goes out into our river systems. It goes out into the oceans. It creates dead zones. We have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that's the size of the state of Maryland. It's massive. There's no life in there. So it's this unnecessary expense that causes all this harm. And all we really have to do is just use wood chips, leave the leaves, or make compost. I'll add one other bit here. When you do put mulch or arborist wood chips, is what I'm recommending. When you put arborist wood chips around your tree, just make sure you don't do this. This is called a mulch volcano. And you'll notice that the base of the tree, I can't see any roots flaring out. And that means we are essentially just rotting the trunk. I could do a whole lecture on sort of the biology here, but I'm going to just skip it and say, don't do this, and instead do this. This is how it should look. This is, you can see at the base of this trunk, the trunk is turning into roots. We call that the root flare. And then we have this nice big bed of wood chips, and it goes all the way out to the edge of the canopy. I would actually like to see lots of plants planted under here. Some native shrubs and native understory trees would be great because then we could help moths and butterflies finish their life cycle. But this is still better than this. We don't want to do that. That will kill a tree. This is one of the big reasons why the average lifespan of trees in the suburban USA is 35 years, which is crazy. We know how much longer they can live. I should mention, I've not talked about native today because I assume everybody on this call understands the importance of native plants. Just really not going to go there much at all. But I will just say one little interesting tidbit about native. And here's where the crossover happens on, say, like global warming or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Native plants feed more life, which means that they're more active carbon pumps. So if maybe we care about pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but we don't even care about native plants. Well, this is where the two bridge together because um, if my tree, like an oak, feeds 1,000 species instead of, say, a Japanese maple, which only feeds 10 species, well, then my oak is pumping out more carbon into more life because it has these more complex food webs around it. So that's another great reason for native plants is that they're more active carbon pumps, pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere. All right.
Interrupt for a second.
Promoted out.
Basil, you wanted some
Yep.
questions earlier. Do you mind if I interrupt?
Yeah, yeah, let's stop
Because
here.
there are
This
a
is a great
couple
place to stop.
questions that actually I think would be useful to like mention right now. And those are simply you were mentioning um, you just mentioned the advantages of native trees, and yet many of us have properties in which either specimen trees were planted earlier before we moved in, perhaps even we made that mistake. Sometimes someone mentioned they had, for example, a Japanese elm self-seed, and what do they do with that? I've had Norway maples that whether they were planted or seeded here that have been a problem on my property. And how do you feel about trees that are established but are non-native and particularly the invasive ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's interesting, there's one of the things about this native conversation is that there's a lot of shades of gray. It's not so black and white. Um, I would just sort of broadly say if it's non-native and invasive, then it's damaging local ecology because what happens is invasive plants take over ecosystems and they actually reduce diversity. And when you reduce diversity, then less carbon is flowing through the system. The food webs shrink. We know we're moving counter to the way that our natural systems want to work, which is more diversity, more specialization. So I would say that a non-native invasive plant is actively damaging the well-being of Earth. So therefore, I recommend removal and replacement with native species. Where shades of gray are a little more prevalent is with non-native, non-invasive species. A classic example here in North Carolina are camellias and azaleas from China and Japan. Those are very popular here in the Southeast. They don't necessarily spread and get aggressive. So they stay put and uh, they photosynthesize, they're sequestering carbon. So they are doing these beneficial things. The only difference between them and say I don't know, beautyberry, for example, is that they're just feeding less life. So I would say with that middle category, it's kind of up to you on what you want to do. At worst, it's an opportunity cost for feeding more life. So I tend to get rid of those two, but at the same time, I want to leave a lot of room for people to enjoy their prized Japanese maple or camellia. Now, some species of Japanese maple can be quite invasive, but most stay put. So I like to leave a lot of room for people to enjoy their plants. I didn't know the importance of natives many years ago. This is a journey. We're all on a journey, and we're at different stages of our journey. So I don't think it has to be so black and white in that middle category. I don't know if that's helpful answer or not. I'm happy to put more detail if you want to clarify more.
Oh, go ahead. You can keep talking, I think.
No, I basically answered it, I think, unless you want me to add more.
No, no. I mean, as far as that question, you can just go back to the presentation, I think.
Oh, got it. Okay. Any others that you want me to hit before I move on?
No, I think that's the main one.
Okay,
That was
perfect.
last about it.
Excellent. All right. So, and I sort of alluded to this when I was answering the question. We want to promote an outrageous diversity of life. I love this term. It comes from Michael Phillips, who wrote Mycorrhizal Planet. It's just such a perfect way to say it. And that is nature in a nutshell. It likes outrageous diversity. It's pretty fascinating, actually. But anyway, so we want to do this in our yards. I'm going to give you some more tips and tricks, easy ways you can do this. And again, even if you don't care about these topics, you're going to save time and money. So more reason. All your brush and logs, should stage them in the corner of your property. This is a picture of my corner of my property, sort of out of sight. Brush piles are habitat for salamanders and frogs and turtles and certain birds that need them. Logs are habitat for more life, including beetles. And beetles are this super important workhorse of the landscape. They're moving seeds and they're eating weed seeds and they're just doing all these really important things. They're predators. They hold various pests under control. I also like to keep all my food scraps. I do not get fancy with composting food scraps. You can get fancy if you want to. I do what's called technical term is cold composting. My actual term is lazy composting. I have two pallets there. You can see them on the side of that picture, and I just throw all my food scraps on the other side. Everything eventually rots. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's living and it's now dead, it rots. Um, so I don't think I've let any carbon leave my property in like 3 years since we moved in. Not a shred of it leaves my property. And I like it. It's a fun little game. I try to keep all my carbon. And again, it's the backbone for lots of different outrageous diversity, right? Another thing you can do is turn off your lights or put sensors on your lights so they're not on when we don't need them. This is an actual photo from space. This shows the US at night. And light pollution is a really big deal. There's a lot of birds that are being adversely affected by light pollution. Insect populations are dying out. Like one example, mayflies will look at a sidewalk and they see the reflection. They think it's water. They go to lay their eggs in the water, but it's just pavement, and they don't know. And the young eggs never hatch. So this is a really big problem. I wish more municipalities were mindful of street lights and getting everything on sensors at a minimum. It would also just be nice to see the stars. I live in downtown Raleigh. I don't see any stars, unfortunately. Mosquito sprays. We could do a whole conversation about mosquito sprays. Long story short, they are neurotoxins. And don't let the all natural bit fool you. Asbestos is all natural. Just because it's all natural and organic does not mean it's safe. So yeah, it's a pyrethrin, which is all natural, air quotes, and it's organic, air quotes, sure, but it's still a neurotoxin. And it causes absolute devastation on a property, kills everything. And then guess what? The mosquitoes are the first to come back, along with the aphids and along with the scale insects, because all the predators are dead and gone. So I can actually walk on a property and I can just if I see an infestation of aphids or certain kind of scale insects, I know right away there's mosquito sprays happening. So they don't work. That's the other thing. They just don't even work. So save your time, save your money, and avoid the neurotoxins. Kitties, we all know them and love them, but they have to stay inside. They are responsible for something like 2 to 5 billion bird deaths every year. Bird populations are under severe threat right now. This is a very big issue. So unfortunately, the bells don't work. The bottom line is cats should just be kept inside. And then we already talked about this one, invasive plants. Invasive plants should be removed and replaced with natives, in my opinion. Shades of gray there, but generally invasive plants will cause ecosystem harm. All right, we're down to the final three. This one is one of my favorites. There is so much fascinating waste that happens in the lawn space. Just some interesting little things. And the book goes into more detail, but did you know the #1 crop grown in the US is lawns? And that is ahead of corn and soybeans. And did you know that if you took all the lawns in the country and you put them next to each other, they would be the size of the state of Georgia? And did you know that 1/3 of all publicly available water this is in the US, goes towards lawn irrigation? There's just lawnmowers emit 10 times more pollution and CO2 related pollution than cars do because their engines are not regulated in the way that car engines are. So we do this just incredible amount of money and extraction and damage and pollution. We talked about fertilizers earlier. There's just a whole litany, just a litany of issues. And all this, so 10% of Americans can actually spend time in their yard. Y'all, 1 in 10% Americans ever goes into their yard to enjoy it. So what is the point? We could just walk away from all that waste and all that money and all that extraction, just all of it. And instead we call them Piedmont prairies for fun here down in the Southeast, but what they really are is native meadows. It's a collection of native grasses and flowers. And They don't require irrigation. They don't require fertilization. They only have to be cut once a year. They provide these deep roots that build deep soil. You know, grass, the roots are like this deep. That's just the depth to which you can build soil correlates the depth of the root, right? We know it's the plant feeding life through its roots. That's what build the backbone for building soil. So if the roots are only 2 inches deep, that's all the soil you get. In contrast, many of these native grasses and flowers will have roots that are 1 to 12 feet deep. So you're getting way more soil, which means you're getting way more water being held. You're affecting your microclimate in terms of rainfall and things like that. You're feeding so much life. It's just everything good all at once, you know? It's this amazing thing. Now, the one thing I will tell you, I know most of you understand the importance of this idea, and many people are even doing this now. What we do at Leaf and Limb, we plant these from seed instead of from plugs. And I would make the argument that the way forward here is from seed and not from plugs. Plugs require an intensive amount of management to get established because you have to hand weed around your plugs for 2 to 3 years. And that is incredibly labor intensive. I sort of began my journey on this just because I was tired of mowing my yard back in 2016. And I remember my first work was with using sort of plugs and a more standard approach. But it was so labor intensive that I just couldn't understand. I would think about the fields where I would hike. And nobody's out there pulling weeds. So why was that working? Well, that was sort of where the seed realization hit me. And I converted to trying working with seed. And over the last 6, 7 years, we've come to find that working with seed allows you to employ all the same tools and techniques you would for a normal lawn, but you're just applying them differently. And you can get this great result, this native meadow, for not a lot of work. The book goes into a lot of detail. I'm going to just walk you through a few photos here. This is a picture of one that's established. This is sort of what they look like at the beginning. People always, it's a bit of a shock when you see it, and it's a process. It takes 3 years to make this conversion. So we always include a sign. We find the signs to be very helpful in letting the neighbors know what's going to be happening. Our sign includes a QR code where they can go and they can learn more. Sorry, hold on. Because we find that education is so important. And also sometimes you get neighbors who are upset. They need to understand what's happening. So I'm a big fan of the signage. Year 1 doesn't look great. You're killing off the vegetation. I do recommend a herbicide, which I know is probably a shocker. Herbicide is also not shades of gray. Sorry, not black and white, unfortunately. It's shades of gray. I think for most settings, herbicides are inappropriate. I don't think they should be used with food systems. I don't think they should be used in perpetual maintenance cycles. But if you're using an herbicide for the sake of ecological restoration, so if you're doing some damage for a much brighter future and there's no other way forward, right? There needs to be no other way forward, then it can be a good option. And I would argue that for most of these lawn conversions, particularly with Bermuda grass, and perhaps it's not as prevalent in your area. Down here in North Carolina, Bermuda grass is the norm. And it is, I mean, we have tried everything under the sun. Before we got to herbicides, we tried solarization, occultation, smothering, everything. And at the end of the day, we just could not get anything to work very well. So anyway, 1 step back, 10 steps forward. You start with an herbicide. If you want more details about that, I have a whole in-depth article about this that's linked from the book with lots of research. I would definitely encourage you to go read this article. Hopefully, if you're black and white on herbicides, it might turn it into shades of gray for you. Here's a photo. Top is that Bermuda grass I was telling you about. This is an example. This is before we started. And then below is the first year of this conversion. And it's quite dense, which is another thing that I love about the seeds. They're very dense. Here's another example of a first year, and they get quite a bit more beautiful over time. Here's an example of a mature installation. This is actually my house. I only have these native meadows and what we call pocket forests, which are kind of like Miyawaki. We'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, this is a more mature establishment. Over time, they just get more and more interesting. There's a lot of species that don't come to fruition until much later in the process. It's a 3-year conversion. Years 1 and year 2, you have to do lots of cuts, but no more than you'd be doing in your lawn already. And then by the time you get to year 3, typically these are mature and they really only need 1 cut, plus a little bit of monitoring for some of those invasive plants that tend to pop up. I'm not going to get into detail here. The book has a very complete step-by-step how to do this. It explains why doing this from seed is just a fraction of the time of doing it from plugs. And I also include links to videos. So if you want to try it out, check out the book. These are some root systems. Y'all, these are some native plants. All the way here on the left, you can barely even see it. It looks like a little caterpillar or something. That's turf grass. Look how tiny the roots are, so that you can see the difference here on root depth. And then we talked about the food webs. So on the right is grass, a very simple food web, and then on the left is native plants, and that's just the beginning of a very complex set of food web. Okay, we are nearing the end here. I want to talk about this. So there is, we've developed a different method for how we do tree planting. And let me give you sort of a backstory on this. Similar to my journey with my own yard, we sort of took a different journey with, we work for a lot of HOAs, and HOAs spend a lot of money on what's called bed management. This is this idea that around a tree, there's this bed, and that bed has to be, well, typically what HOAs are doing is they're spreading they're spraying the bed with herbicides multiple times per year. So this is where I'm very much against the use of herbicide. That's a maintenance cycle. It's not adding anything. We're not doing 1 step back for 10 forward. We're just harm, harm, harm. So they're spraying these beds with herbicides. They're doing edging. They're replenishing the mulch. They're doing all this activity, and it's this huge expense for HOAs. We had some HOAs that we worked with on at least getting rid of the herbicide and hand pulling the weeds, but it adds a substantial amount of cost to do that. So that only works for those few HOAs that had a lot of extra money. It's pretty rare for an HOA to have that kind of money. So what we saw in our clients' communities and then also at shopping centers is there's this perpetual cycle of spending money to do harm. And we sort of began experimenting on, well, how can we rethink those beds? And where we landed was we just started planting lots of plants in those spaces. It's kind of like the meadow approach. We moved from, the idea of planting a meadow from seed is that you're managing a community of flowers and grasses instead of individual flowers and grasses, which is the plug model. Well, as we started loading up these beds with more plants, we sort of began managing communities of trees and shrubs instead of individual trees and shrubs. And when that happens, there's a shift that happens. Not only does it reduce maintenance costs and time, because now you're not having to do the mulch replenishment and the edging and all this, but it also adds this amazing rising tide lifts all boats scenarios where we're getting healthier soil and more life and more photosynthesis. These same things that are happening in the meadow system are happening with what we used to call high density planting. High density planting just is not a great name, so we call them pocket forests instead. I will also say that I learned about Miyawaki later in this journey, and we actually are very similar. The difference between our method and Miyawaki is that we focus a lot less on soil prep. Soil prep in the Miyawaki method is really great. I love it, but it's not practical for most people or municipalities from a budget standpoint. It's too time and labor intensive. So what we do is we simply put down cardboard or brown paper we're finding to be equally effective as cardboard. And then we put 6 to 8 inches of arborist wood chips on top of that cardboard, and we let it rot in place for about 4 to 6 months. That is our bed prep, basically. And that sets the stage for really fantastic growing conditions. So ultimately, we bypass, and we do a lot less on maintenance. What this means is our approach, say, versus Miyawaki, is that it's much cheaper, but we're going to have higher mortality. However, our mortality still falls between, say, 5 and 30%. And even at 30%, it might sound like a lot, but when you have, you can see this photo right in front of you, 30% of those young saplings dying you don't even notice. There's still so much to go around. So I'm going to sort of walk you through what we do and also look at some photos. Um, we use 1 and 2 year old saplings. I already mentioned how we prep. It's just cardboard and wood chips. After it gets a little mushy and rotten a little bit, we come back in the dormant season and we just load up the area with these young saplings. The one you're looking at had 90 different native tree and shrub species, which was outrageous, of course. So we're normally around the 40 mark. And again, what's beautiful about this is planting saplings is very easy. So this space you're looking at right here, the client had originally just wanted just your normal nursery design, like give me some containerized trees here and give me some containerized shrubs there, and we'll do like 10 of them in this space. And we came back and proposed this other idea. And instead of like 10 plants, I think we have about 220 trees here. And the remarkable thing is that buying and planting those 220 trees was the same time and same money that we would have spent on the 10 containerized trees. So we really didn't spend any more time or money. Loaded this area up. This is just one case study we're looking at today. This is 5 months later. One of the really cool things that happens in these ecosystems is that as these tree roots begin to mingle underground, they start exchanging nutrients and benefits. They all, again, these plants are from ecosystems where they grow in community with other plants. Being alone is not the norm for a tree. They grow in communities. So we're tapping into that natural system. This is 5 months in, that same site we just looked at. This is 16 months later, same site, same position. We have a little picture post here. So we're talking about now, this is the second growing season. And then boom, this is the third growing season. I mean, you really, at this point, the camera kind of doesn't help, but I'll tell you, we have trees in here that went from a literal pencil to 35 feet tall in the third growing season. It's remarkable. And the beautiful thing is we didn't spend any more time or money planting this space than we would have using traditional trees. And now this is a maintenance-free space. We're not adding, we're not doing like, there's no fertilizers and there's no mulching and there's no, raking away the leaves, which hopefully you're not doing, but a lot of HOAs are, unfortunately. There's no edging, there's no nothing. It's just this fully occupied space. And we're just maximizing the amount of life below, above and below ground. Dense, deep root systems, dense, tall canopies, every layer. I mean, you're just like, it is a cube of maximizing photosynthesis and soil formation. And it's amazing. I get all kinds we go in here and we're looking for insects. We find all kinds of interesting insects in here, lots of birds stopping by. It's an oasis. We also apply the same, hold on one second. We also apply the same concept towards what are called thickets. And we love thickets because it's another ecosystem. Unfortunately, this is an ecosystem that's increasingly rare. Particularly with agriculture, the way that fields go straight into woods, we're losing that edge system. Thickets typically would occupy the transition zone between fields and forests. We just don't see that much anymore. So you got this ecosystem need. So we're maximizing diversity. We're hitting all the bells we're talking about, but just getting sort of to the other side of it. What's fun about these thickets is you can use them as a way to rethink your privacy rows or rethink erosion control. They grow very quickly. It's the exact same stuff we've been talking about, but we're only using shrub species and tree species that cap out at about 20 feet. It's all native, of course. In this particular one, we added some blueberry and some Chickasaw plum, some other food-bearing shrubs around the outer edge so the neighbors could actually enjoy the fruit. And this one, okay, again, it started off really small, kind of like this. This is 5 months, so we're just halfway through the first growing season. This is 16 months. We're halfway through the second growing season. And you'll notice off on the side there, it just merges straight into a native meadow. And then, boom, in the third growing season, it's a full-on, I mean, we've hit 20 feet. This thing it's wild. It's beautiful. It's amazing. There's so much life happening. I'm going to go back a slide. I love these systems together are so easy. This property right here that we're looking at, when we it is now full of mature, you can't really see it. There's a little patch of grass in the middle here, but everything else is prairies and thickets and pocket forests. The management on this site is so easy. It's a quarter-acre lot that takes about 8 hours per growing season to manage. So it's substantially less than a traditional yard. And the amount of life here is just insane. I mean, this is the yard in the neighborhood where the bats are coming in the evening because there's so much insect activity. Also, y'all, excuse me, I did not mention this earlier, but when is the last time you saw bugs on your windshield? I mean, I'm not that old. I'm in my 40s, but when I was a kid, I remember seeing windshields splattered with bugs when we would drive to the coast. I just don't see that anymore. And unfortunately, that's a real thing. Insects are disappearing. So this being able to see all that insect activity and the bats being there, that's really good. We need insects. All right, I'm on the last point. We talked about Project Pando. Um, this to me is really exciting. So we're now sort of entering into a more advanced thing. This is not for everybody, but we've developed this model through Project Pando where you can very easily grow your own native saplings. And it's really fun because you can engage your community in helping find native seeds and process native seeds and then build these beds, which are very easy to build. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, and then raise up these saplings. The beauty is not only are you getting your just a free supply line of whatever native trees and shrubs you want, but getting people engaged in this work is so important. We have found that it's important to learn about these concepts, but you also really need an experiential learning component. And when you get the experiential learning component of getting to work directly with soil and trees, it shifts your mindset in a way that's really, it's hard to get from just reading. And we love our community. We have a robust community around this work now. Lots of people that help gather seeds. This is our nonprofit again, help process seeds. We're now giving away about 10,000 native saplings per year to the community, just for free or for ecological restoration. And I think this year we have something like 85 native tree and shrub species growing. And we're doing all this for just, I mean, like the cost of making these beds, which is nothing. Essentially, these beds are, okay, by the way, sorry, this is Project Panda. It's on the website if you want to see more. It's our nonprofit. Our website is leaflimb.com. I should mention that we spent 4 years developing a blueprint for how to do this work, and that is section 5 of the book. So in section 5, we give away just the whole process of how this works with the hopes that maybe you'll start this in your community. Call it what you want, doesn't matter. Just do the work. Do it with some friends, do it with your neighborhood, do it with your whole city. You're going to start changing hearts and minds. People are going to love it. It's a fun thing to do when you're out with your kids or your grandkids or your dog, collect native seeds. It's very rewarding work. We build these beds. On the bottom of these beds, you have this wire screen, and we fill the beds with rotting leaves that we actually get from the city for free from their curbside collection. So we're reusing a waste cycle, which is really cool. And then we plant the seeds in the leaf mold. And then as the seeds germinate and their roots start growing down, they eventually reach the bottom of the bed where we find this mesh screen. They poke through the mesh screen and they encounter air. When that happens, they stop growing and they instead start spreading laterally. All that means is you have these fantastic root systems. This method is called air pruning. And when the young saplings are grown to 1 or 2 years old and we're ready to give them away, we reach our hands in there and we pull out chunks of trees and we sort of detangle each sapling. It's actually quite easy. They detach from each other very easily. And then we give them away for these projects. They go to this work right here. So this is a supply line for the community. People who want to do these can come get native saplings from us, or ecological restoration projects, stream bank restoration. We're giving them the plant material they need to make that happen. This is seed processing. Everybody at Leaf and Limb, we all participate in our own nonprofit. So this is us having fun on a Friday afternoon processing seeds. A lot of smiles and good times. And that's the fun thing about this work. You can get together with your neighbors and your community, and there's a lot of smiles and good times. Here's a box of red buds that's grown up. It's ready for giveaway. And that brings us to sort of the final point of this whole presentation, which is this journey will at a minimum save you time and money. And at a maximum, you're going to find joy and you're going to help heal our earth. And I have found this to be a very rewarding journey. And I hope that this presentation has given you some good information. And if you'd like more, go get the book. Like I said, we're giving it away for free because we really want to get the word out there. And would love to hear from you with any questions you have right now or just in the future. There's an email in the book. Love to hear from you in the future. Thank you for your time today.
Hey, thanks. So that was an amazing presentation. I mean, both presentations have been excellent so far. And I have a few questions that the audience has submitted. I'm
Please.
going to try to put some of them together for you. The first one is, let's say, tie together a bunch of these questions about saplings. Um, so let me put these together. First of all, can you plant tree saplings and thickets in areas which already have a tree canopy? For example, if I think of right here, looking out my window, I have an area where I have a number of trees, but they're actually quite mature trees, and there's really not much understory growth underneath them, but there could be understory trees. Could I plant something there? Um, and along with that, also, I have quite a few, like everybody in New Jersey, except maybe the people who are lucky enough to live in highly urbanized communities. We
Dear.
have a major problem with deer browse. We have 20
Yep.
times the historical deer population. Because of the way my property is set up, I can't put a 8 foot tall or 10 foot tall deer fence around. I know a lot of people have that same problem. So
I
those
have
are let's say,
answers.
those, and the other question is, what time of year should you plant the tree saplings? What's the best practice for doing that? So I'll let you answer those.
Yeah. Let's start with the good news about deer. Sean Dombrowski up in upstate New York, he has a channel called Edible Acres, and I love his channel. Also, since y'all are close, you could order saplings from him. Um, he has this amazing fence that he developed for deer that uses just simply posts and fishing line. And I've linked it in the book and it works. We've done grow trials here locally. It's effective. So I would start by saying try that method. I think you might find success. And also you have to worry about rabbits. And luckily rabbits are a little bit easier. You can use some chicken wire fence with sod stakes and you just use a sod stake to push in the bottom of the wire. So try that out for the deer. We've had great success down here. We also have mega deer pressure. We could do a whole presentation about the ecological damage that deer are creating right now. They're destroying our future forests, but we won't go there right now. In terms of timing, dormant season is best. So for us, that means November, December, January, February, March. Although November is increasingly warm, really, we could not plant right now. It's hot down here. Not hot, but so for us, it's sort of shrinking December through, say, March. For you all, you might have a wider planting season if depending on where you are, if you have a lot of snow and you have to pick sort of before or after the snow, I'd recommend before, just because it gives the roots a little bit more time to get in the soil. But at the same time, if it gets real cold, you may have to go after the snow. Just don't plant in summer unless you don't mind more mortality. I'm thinking of a couple of our projects now where we did plant in summer because the client wanted us to, and these are pocket forests now. And it was blasting hot because it is here in North Carolina. We lost 30% of the trees on that site. That's one of the 30% mortality sites, but it was okay. A lot made it through. Saplings need very little water. So traditionally, I would say dormant season, but give it a go in summer if you need to. Saplings don't need much. And then you asked about the first part of that question. Sorry, it was.
The first part was, how about planting in areas where there already
Oh,
is
yes,
tree?
understory. Yes. Understory works well. And the beauty of saplings, again, is you only need one shovel. You just push it in the ground and wedge it open. So if you're doing a containerized tree, you would have need to make a bigger hole, and that causes root damage. So yeah, choose species that are understory trees and shrubs and load it up with those areas with those saplings. Use the fishing line deer control method, see if it works, and that might be your path forward.
Super. I'm going to give that a try. I actually did buy some fishing line with the intent of doing that and have been a little bit lazy about that. I think it's trying to try that instead of just chasing the deer off my property all the time, which,
Sean's video is linked in the book. Definitely watch it because there's some
well,
like specifications on the fishing line and whatnot.
oh, okay.
But yeah, it works.
I will definitely check that out. I think a bunch of us are going to be looking at that right away. Um, Now, one question is, I mentioned at the beginning that I was really lucky personally that for a long time I had a great arborist. She's now gone on and is working for a town. But I've also, run into the first guy who I invited over to take a look. Was basically your kind of classic New Jersey guy with a chainsaw. And he was walking around and we were talking about some trees and he was like, I cut down that tree. That's a weed tree. I said, what is that? Because I didn't know anything. This is before I knew anything about natives. He said, it's a black cherry. I thought to myself, well, that seems like a terrible idea. That's to cut down that tree. And in fact, it's one of my favorite understory trees now. And he never came back because I never invited him back. But you know what? Actually, when we had a big hurricane out here, I made a huge mistake. There was a guy running around telling people that some of their trees were dangerous, and there was an oak that he said was leaning and it was threatening my house. And well, I had him cut it down. Didn't know anything. We'd been in the house for a few months. And in the end, it turned out, I looked and I saw photos. It had been growing like that forever. Big mistake on my part. I feel terrible about that to this day. And so I'm wondering how can we identify the good women and men out there who are arborists
Yeah.
and avoid the ones who are really going to be doing damage.
Yeah. It's a good question. And listen, we've all been on, I'm responsible for cutting down thousands of trees. Well, back in the early days of Leaf and Limb, it's part of the journey, unfortunately. You just can't, you can't walk out and just get right to the point. It takes a while to get there. Um, in my opinion. But to your question, the answer would be to find, well, first of all, I don't want to keep plugging the book, but part of the motivation for the chapter about mature trees in the book is to actually empower the consumer to be able to spot the right and wrong arborists. Ditto for the pruning chapter of the book. So one way is just getting knowledge about right practices already will help you. And I hope the book is helpful in that regard. But on the flip side, as you're selecting vendors, if you could find a vendor that does not offer tree removal services, and I got to say, I don't even know if they exist. I think we might be the first in the industry to have done this, but we got completely out of removals, unless it's an invasive plant, of course. That would be great. I don't think you're going to find that. So what you kind of have to watch for is there's a lot of greenwashing that happens in our industry. A lot of people say they care about trees and talk the game, trying to appeal to a certain client base, da da da. But really, I find that I can see in the language and how they write and how do they promote like the removal on their website. Like, is it glorified through photos and high placement on pages, or is it like just buried? And like, we really don't want to do this, but if we must, like, I'd look for the ones where they bury their tree removal stuff as like, we don't really want to do it, but if we have to, we will. And I like the ones that are using more photos and stories around caring and saving a tree. So to some degree, you can tell from the writing, but I will just say a lot of greenwashing. It's tough. So I guess it's a little each, a little research and a little bit of learning through reading or watching videos.
Well, let me just say if you're okay
I'm okay.
hanging on here,
Yeah,
we do have some more questions. We did
I
have a
love
built-in
questions.
15-minute break, so I think we'll eat up some of the break time
Let's do it.
and keep going with the questions because I'm learning a lot. Um, One of the questions that's very specific, but I think again comes down to this question of how do you how do you how do you educate yourself and as a consumer is one of our members asks, says that they have a pin oak with a thin crack um, uh, along most of the trunk on both sides. It's a 30-year-old tree, and the arborist suspects it's rotten to the core. How do you and meanwhile another situation I had was we had a giant oak tree that was I think it must have been hundreds of years old. It was easily 3 feet in circumference. And that went down during a hurricane. I would have never thought it would have gone down. Luckily, my neighbors didn't either because it knocked out power for 14 days around here. And a crew from the Carolinas came and fixed it and put up a pole. But I would have never known that that one was rotten, and it turned out it was. We only found that out after it broke at the bottom. So how do you deal with things like that? Like with how do you identify? Are there any tips you might have for identifying hidden issues in trees, um, like specifically
Yeah,
rot?
yeah. So I just have to caveat everything by saying, I'm not looking at your tree now, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Um, but rot gets a really bad reputation. The truth of the matter is, rotting is a very normal part of tree maturation. Most mature trees will not have a center, and that's normal. They don't need the center. The strength, the engineering beauty of a tree, the genius of the design is that it's like a soda can. Our soda cans and a lot of our pipes are built off the same idea. Like it's one of the most powerful structures there is. You can stand on top of an empty soda can and it's not going to crush. The circularity and the outer rim are the strength of a soda can. Trees are just like soda cans. Their strength comes from the outer portion of the trunk. Doesn't matter if there's interior rot. Uh, so sort of a really fast and easy rule of thumb is that as long as rot or a hole does not affect more than 1/3 the circumference of the trunk, then it's probably okay. Doesn't matter again, so if we're looking at the outer portion of the trunk, less than 1/3 is affected by either the decay or the hole, it's probably okay. And of course, we'll have extreme events, but we can't plan for, like, we should not make decisions based on the possibility of a tornado or crazy storm system hitting our house. It's just, these are low probability events. And in those events, guess what? I've had clients back in 2012, we had this tornado system move through, and we had people who had no trees in their yard because they were scared of the trees in this exact same scenario. And they still had a tree on their house because a tornado picked it up from another property and dumped it on their house. So it's just a pointless endeavor. We really should not plan for those things. And the other thing I'll add to this discussion is, so there's the circumference rule that I just mentioned. And similarly on the roots are sort of what hold the tree on the ground. If there's been no serious disturbance to the tree's roots, and I will define, the book gets into, it's page 89, goes into very exacting detail of these calculations, but essentially there's something called the structural root zone. And as long as we have not cut away too many roots, then the tree is going to be stable. A lot of times when a tree does fall, it's because there might have been like a home renovation or they built the house 10 years ago. And when they did, they graded away enough of the roots to compromise the structural root zone. And it might have taken a decade or two, but then the tree fell. So these are your two primary things to think about. It's root disturbance and it's how much decay or rot is there on the outer portion of the tree. I also want to add more to this mature tree thing. Back in the day, a long time ago, it is believed that maples were the primary hibernation place for black bears here on the East Coast because they were so big and spacious. There was enough room in there for those bears to sleep through the winter. So that just sort of confirms the idea that hollows inside of a tree are just a normal part of tree maturation. Again, it's the soda can effect. That's the engineering genius of the tree's design.
That's an incredible analogy, and I didn't know that at all. It's like fascinating. There are so many questions, but we're just going to try to wrap up with a couple more of them. One is, or one sort of interrelated set of questions again, is dealing with towns in particular. There are people both on the one hand, there's someone who is a newly elected town council member who's asking about some things that they could that might be what kind of low-hanging initiatives you might think of that they could implement and present to their fellow elected officials. And then conversely, there are people who are asking for suggestions for working with the parks departments and often their vendors who seem to have very different ideas of what landscaping is from what you might be presenting. Um, and wanting to plant invasives, wanting to cut down healthy trees. Um, and also, there are other questions that are often interrelated, like the vendors wanting to remove leaves, or people feeling, whether in the town or in town government or other residents feeling that leaf litter, or even compost piles are seen as harboring rats or dangerous. And then the final question that's related to all that is when we suggest planting prairies or even woodland edge habitats. Around here, we often get people, and even overseas. I just had a friend raise this as an issue overseas. We often have people very concerned about ticks.
Mm.
And how they are harbored in plant matter. So all sort of related things, but having a bit to do, say, with if overarching theme of dealing with the government and other people, and also kind of a panic about natural materials in a landscape that seems pretty prevalent in our society today.
Yeah, these are great questions. I just want to add one little, just going back to our last point. I did not do the soda can discussion in the book, and I'm realizing that's actually a little bit of a hole in the book. I should, on that note, add we plan on revising this book with each print run. So please send me feedback on things. If you get the book and you have questions, there's an email in there because we want to keep this current. I'd love to hear from you. And just on this feedback point, I also want to add that for presentations, I always want feedback. I'd love to know what went well and what didn't go well. I'm always trying to just make it better and more engaging. So if, my email's there, if you send me your thoughts about what you did and didn't like today, it'd be very helpful, and I'd appreciate that. Getting to your question, I'll go both at the higher level question and sort of on the specifics. One thing on the so higher level, changing public perception. Lots of ways to do this. I think so. Public signage around installations helps with this. I think creating a Project Pando um, group in your community can help with this. I think people need just to be educated intellectually at presentations and through signage, but they also need that experiential engagement and education that I sort of alluded to earlier. Um, I think at a government level, typically one of the really powerful places to make changes is, of course, your city council, but there's a more nuanced version of that. I assume it's similar in New Jersey as it is in North Carolina, but here we have these codes that govern our cities and how development can be done and how landscaping can be done. And these are often called uniform developments ordinances or land development ordinances. And this is where the nitty-gritty happens about what developers can do and what neighborhoods can do, et cetera. And oftentimes the committees will accept requests for revisions to UDOs, and there are often working groups you can get on to help update those UDOs. And this is where like one or two people can make a huge difference. So think about your city codes and ordinances and getting involved in that aspect. And then think about the education side as well, whether experiential or intellectual. So in terms of the specifics, leaving the leaves is interesting to me. That's, one of the ways to get around that is maybe you just rake them out of your grass and into your bed so it looks presentable, quote unquote presentable. Um, you can also, just like I was saying, maybe you just really need to get them all off the grass and the beds, but at least just leave them on site somewhere. You could stack it in the corner of your property. Leaving the leaves doesn't mean you have to actually leave them where they fall. The idea really is about leaving the carbon on your property. That's sort of the beauty of it. If you can leave the leaves whole, great, because they're going to have all those eggs and insects. If you must shred them, go for it. It's not as good, but it's better than taking it to the landfill. In terms of ticks, so one of the really cool things about these ecosystems, particularly the grasslands, is this is not where ticks want to be. There are a lot of things in these ecosystems that eat tick nymphs. Beetles are a great example. They love eating little baby ticks. So when you get that outrageous diversity in play, especially in a native meadow, you're not going to find ticks. I'm sure many people here have been following Rebecca McMacken and some of her. She's got a great newsletter. It's called she has a different moon name each time she does a newsletter, but I think maybe 2 or 3 ago she shared some research about research being done on ticks. And it turns out that really their place to hang out is more like woodland edge. And again, we probably all know this, but it's the deer that really are driving tick populations right now. And it's the lack of predators also. So we want these healthy ecosystems because then the predators are around, and when the predators are around, they're going to eat these tick nymphs. So we can start getting things balanced a little bit. There was one more you said, but I can't remember it now. I'll leave
Um,
it at that.
well, we're actually just about ready for our next speaker, so we should. I should probably. I don't remember what the answer to that one, what the question was, so I think we're just going to go on. But that was just a fabulous presentation, and I've learned a lot. I'm very eager to dig in some more in the book and also see the revision that is coming out in December. Am I correct on that?
Yes, we're doing a second run. Yeah, it's going to be a second edition,
That's just
making quite a
amazing.
bit of updates. And again, send me your feedback about today or the book. And I had such a fun time today, y'all. I hope it was
Oh,
worth
it's
your
great.
time. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you.